that gets done without, us being aware of where that came from. Things like, hey, where does props come from? That's kind of crazy. Where did that thing come out of nowhere? I have access to something, but I don't know how it got into the player component. Where did that thing come from? And so there must be things like that happening under the hood because it's a React component, right? I'm able to call these components by their name and they render and they like return their HTML. How is that possible? This is just a different way of calling a function. If it was a function and the function returned an HTML element, then that would make sense to us. We'd be like, oh yeah, functions return things. If the thing you're returning is an HTML element, awesome, that makes sense. And that's kind of what these do. They return HTML elements. But I've never called a function like that in that context, right? That's kind of new. I've only referenced HTML elements like that. So how does that happen? Once again, it's the ability to inherit from the React component that is giving us additional functionality. Okay, the fact that we've also given it an uppercase as a component means it'll treat it like a React component also. Once again, it works kind of here, but we might have issues later on when we don't have the uppercase. Okay. Any other questions about some of the material we covered earlier? It's a lot of new material, so I would assume there might be a handful of questions. Not.
I have a question.
Sure.
So in the class apps extend React, if you could scroll down, for the player, which player X, are you able to, I guess, define more things in that single statement, or do you need to create another one?
Nope. I could say name is Joe or name is Matt. Here, I could say name is equal to Joe. So if we somehow wanted to hard code their names, we could do this as well. And what happens is this will return in props. Props will now be an object that contains two key value pairs. The first key will be which player with a value of X. The second key will be name with a value of Matt. Okay?
Very cool.
So you can do this as many times as you want. These just become, they're almost kind of like properties, right? Because that's what they look like. If I was going to give something an SRC, a source for a script file, it would equal and then it would be something, right, in quotes. Same thing, if it was an href is equal to something, and then in quotes you put the URL to where it's going. The same context. It's just, once again, React, because we're inheriting, because it's React component, has stuff running under the hood that we don't have to be aware of. And this running under the hood is an example of declarative programming. Declarative means it's extrapolated some of that functionality, so we don't need to know what's happening, and it's how I compared it to a for loop versus a for each. I don't need, if I know how to use a for each loop, then I don't need to be like I is equal to yada yada. I don't even need to know how the looping happens. I just need to know that when the loop happens, I'm past the element and I'm past the index. And I make the decision what I want to do. How the loop runs is irrelevant at that point in time. Just knowing that it runs ascending from the 0 element to the last element, that's all I need to know. And in essence, once we get the construct down for how React does its thing, that's all we need to know. How it structures this on the back end and where it's happening in the React component, that's just, something the React engineers would want to delve into. And if you were like, I'm going to improve React, then maybe you'd, try to hit the open source React platform and try to make it better, because that's what people do all the time. They come up with stuff to make it better. Okay? I'm going to get rid of these. You still need the closing. Awesome. But that's a good question, and you'll see that later. You'll see us passing things down later. Cool. Any other questions? I'm sure there'll be plenty.
Hey, Joe, I had a question. Kind of with the structure of it, would we only want to make classes for kind of each component that would actually have data, or does it also make sense if you made, for instance, like a class to group some of those subcomponents? I wasn't sure when approaching it. Does that question make sense?
No, the question makes sense. Yeah, I mean, obviously we're organizing things here, and components, think of a component, and I did mention earlier that components can be structured as either class-based, I don't know if I put it here, class-based components, but there's also functional components as well. So I said, come on, be sort of uppercase. There's class-based components. I'm also going to put here functional components. We didn't create a functional component. I don't have any examples today of a functional component. I don't want to kind of deviate and kind of walk down a road. Well, I'm going to take everyone's attention away. But a functional component doesn't allow state, okay? Class-based component, I'm going to say here, and we're going to get into state, can include state if needed, okay? I'm also going to put in here that a class-based component can include methods, okay? A functional component doesn't include methods, okay? So a functional component is really a dumbed-down version of a component. A class-based component gives you more things to work with. I almost think like a class-based component, once again, is a class that has all these little methods and can work out internal logic by calling these pre-packaged methods that return something that can be passed to another of the methods. And then ultimately you can have something like, hey, class, return the thing, and then it returns the thing. But the reason why you would choose class-based components in this instance is because we're teaching it like this. We wanted one platform, one way to teach you so people wouldn't kind of get lost in which way to go. But the reason why you do break them down into components in general is to have smaller things that are reusable, right? In this instance, this header is so tiny. Does it really make sense to spin it off into its own thing? Probably not. It's only returning this thing, right? In the context of these apps, it doesn't necessarily make it a reasonable choice to spin off the header if it's returning is an H1, right? I may just go down into the app and just put a section for header and put the header in there. Like, you may opt to do that. But the exercises this morning were meant to convey that an app is broken down into smaller things. And because it's broken into smaller things, we can pass things into those smaller things, and it can render things. Maybe the header will be passed in some sort of array of objects, and those objects will be nav elements, and we can spin off new nav elements inside any header because our header has been configured to accept an input and run with that input to generate nav items, because that's how we've developed the header element. Right? Because there still has to be predictability. So predictable input produces predictable output. That's what a function does. And these are really, in essence, just kind of glorified, functions in a way. They're not. I mean, they're classes, but they're kind of these glorified things. Is that cool? Can I answer it, CJ? All right. I know it's a lot. It's just, it's hard without that. I know that you don't see the whole picture yet. For me to be like, there's a whole other world of stuff out there that you haven't been exposed to. So I can only explain it in the context what we've taught, and maybe throw in something that we haven't taught. But I don't want to get too sidetracked. Cool. All right. I think we're good. And if there's something else, you can always slack me. So we're going to jump into state. So the things that I mentioned that were really, really important with React, and I think, we've been really kind of covering them today, right? That's our ultimate goal, is to do things like components, okay? Those things are key. We've worked with props, And now state is the thing that we're going to work with. Okay, so just know, like, when you're talking React, these things are the things that you're going to be working with. And components, once again, can be broken into class-based components and functional components. Okay, we didn't get into functional, but there are two different types of components. We'll get into state, and state has its own things, right, that we can work with at some point in time. You don't know what those things are yet, but you will, and we'll go into what those things are. Let's say that. All right. So let me clear this. Clear. All right. So what the objectives for the afternoon are to introduce, kind of learn what about state, right? What is it? Learn how to declare state in a React component. There is a structure for this in order to use state. And learn how to iterate over some data and render it. And this was kind of the precursor when I had mentioned in the morning lecture, like, hey, what if I wanted to loop 9 times to create 9 squares? I don't know, there's got to be an easier way than just like copying and pasting 9 squares, right? That doesn't seem efficient at all. There's got to be a way to create a loop and do that. And there is, but you have to do it in the React way. Okay, and we'll take a look at that. So, what is state? State is a particular view of a React component based on its data, and that's really key. State is what you see on the screen as it reflects what's in the data. Okay? Changes to the data change the state, right? Sometimes I try to compare it to, somebody's mood. We have a move. There's a state of mind that we're in, and then when we go outside, something could enhance that state of mood or change that state of mood, right? Something changed that changed our state of mood, okay? And so your app has a state of data that it's aware of. When things are added to an array, and those things need to be displayed on the screen, well, then the state has changed. New thing was added to an array, and that new thing needs to be rendered on the screen, so the state now contains the new thing. The state has changed. If something is deleted, well, then the state needs to remove that from that array, and then it needs to remove it from the screen. The state has changed. So the state is really just a representation of what is the data right now as we speak. That's really what it is, okay? And so they have a little, here about a shopping cart. We have a component that has our shopping cart. At first our cart is empty, right? So the state of our shopping cart is empty, or the state of our application that has a shopping cart is currently empty, right? And then we could add something to the shopping cart, which would change the state of our application. At that point in time, we'd probably see in the top right over here the little, shopping cart with the number 1 on it. And that would reflect that we added something and we changed the state of our application, okay? And so here they're just, giving you an item. We're adding it. This item has an item name, description, and price, which is relevant because this represents a single item. Every item must maintain this consistency of keys. The values will change depending on what the item name is, but the keys need to be consistent, okay? And so we're going to go ahead and create this. Now, we're done with setting up. We're done with the morning lectures, right? So if I'm going to get out of this tic-tac-toe, and I see that I have, these 2 previous Intro to React and React tic-tac-toe. We're not using any of those. We're going to create a brand new app for the afternoon. And so I am going to make a new directory, mkdir, hey, React, state, store, boom, ls. I see React state store. So I'm going to change into the React state store, right? There's nothing in there. Once again, the whole touch app, JS, index, HTML. just get those things running. But there's also some data that we want to have inside of our app. So I'm going to move. If I go back here and I do an ls, I don't see any data in here. But if I did go back up to, let me just go back up here. Let me go back into instructor examples. Can I see it? I don't have the data, so I'm gonna have to copy the data over. I don't think so. Let me see. Instructor notes. It's just gonna be inside. Right, student examples. Yeah, you have the data, so I'm gonna have to copy this data. I'll copy this data on my side, and then I'll take it over. You know what? I'm just gonna do this. Copy all. I'm going to copy it. I'll go to instructor notes, non-instructor notes, instructor examples. All right. Oh, you know what? I haven't pushed up anything, so I'm not going to see it there. So now that I have it, I'll just create the file on my side. But what we want to do, let me go back to the lecture real quick. And here is you want to copy or move that JS file into the current directory so we have access to it. Okay, so you would move ... go up one directory, grab JS, and then put it, and that dot is important, put it here. Move it here into the React state. So once you do an ls, you should see app, index, and data.js. Okay, so I'm going to go here. I'm just going to open up. Let me just do this. Change directory into React, state store, ls, atom dot. Okay, it's going to open up a brand new atom for me. And here we go. I'm just going to create a new file called data.js, and I will paste the data in there. Okay. So you should have these 3 files. Okay. Just make sure, set up all those files. Should just take a moment. Create the files and move data.js to the folder. Okay? Just make sure you do that, and then we'll go ahead and we'll set up the rest of it. Okay? We'll set up the HTML relatively easily. We're really at this point in time just going to kind of copy the HTML just to get things moving. This would be, you know, what is it? It's going to be the 3rd time we've done this. You had to do it with the lab, so at some point in time, just have to take the copy and paste approach. Okay. It's good. We got 12. 13 looks good. I'm gonna just split the screen here. And here we go. I'm gonna be in this HTML file, and I'm just gonna take all of that HTML and just put it in there. Okay. I'm just gonna point out here that I'll make a little comment here that data.js needs to be loaded before app. Okay, because in app.js we will be referencing data. So if data has not been loaded, we cannot reference it. Okay, this has to be the order of things that were loaded. All right, once again, React needs to be loaded before React DOM because React DOM has a dependency on React. Okay, Babel is where it is because it needs to compile stuff and it needs to be loaded before app.js is. Okay, because this text.babel will be looking for some sort of Babel tool in the global environment. Okay. And then all I'm going to do here is in app.js, just for right now, just to test things, is we are going to just console log and see that we have data, right? So this should be our data. If I take a look at the data file, it has products. Okay, it's products is an array. Cool, and products has all this stuff in it. And if we wanted to see that stuff, the fact that it's loaded where it is, we should be able to console log and say, hey, this is products. And say products. Okay. If I do that now, because we're using React again, you know, we need to start it using the HTTP server. Okay, so I'm going to start up the HTTP server. Now, I'm just going to make a note with the HTTP server. You can start it if you wanted to have multiple files opened up, right? Doing this by default will open it up on 8080. If I wanted to, I could do -P and start it up on a specific port. Okay, I'm just going to leave it as the default, which is 8081. But you have the choice of starting this on different ports if you wanted to. 8080, boom. Once again, I'm going to go to Developer Tools and see the products array, all the items, okay? So I'm just going to say here, all set, HTML, yeah, it's all set up, and can see the products console. Okay, just let me know when everything's set up and you can see the products in the console. At this point in time, it's, you know, a fairly basic build. This is no huge leap from this morning. Okay. All we did, really, a little bit differently, was add this data.js file and move it. Right? That's all we did. And in app.js, I'm just console logging the data. So I can see what it is that we will be working with, right? This array of standardized objects is ultimately going to be displayed on the screen, okay? You know, once we get that working, we are going to, you know, create create our app component. I'm just going to put a couple of placeholders here and then use React DOM to render that the parent. Okay, whatever that parent component is. React DOM is going to render one thing. The thing you want to render and where you want to render, that's what this thing does. You only run it once, that's it. The 98% of our time is here, like using the components here. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and create the component, the app component. And really, once again, it's a class where the app extends React component. Okay? All components must render something, and all render methods must return some sort of one parent level element that can have as many nested elements inside. In this instance, we have a div that has an h1. We're just going to say, hey, hi there. There's a UL. I'm going to close the UL. And this little magic right here is where we are going to loop over the elements and render each one of them on the screen as an LI. Okay? So With JSX earlier, when we had the console log message, we saw that having a message, when we rendered it, we needed to have curly braces, right? This is what we did earlier. We had curly braces. If I had something up here like message, so if I wanted to render, instead of hi there, if I wanted it to render a message earlier, I think we said, you know, const message. This isn't in the lecture notes. I'm just kind of putting it there as a reference note. Hi there, right? If I wanted to do that and I wanted to render hi there here, well, I would use curly braces and then say message. Okay, and that should, once again, I'm just going to make sure that this thing can break it, right? Oh, because we haven't added the React DOM yet. We still have to add the React DOM. But if I was to render that, I would see the message. Okay, so down here, I'm going to go ahead and just add the products, and then we'll get it all set, and I'll kind of go back here, and we'll take a look at it. So curly braces, products, that's the array of things. We're going to map. That's a looping construct on an array of things, right? This is how you write the callback function. And we're going to return an li item, where the item's name is what we're going to see on the screen. Okay, so this is how we would loop over and return these things. Okay? Now, we don't have anything on the screen as of yet. We just have this app component. We still need to React DOM render it. So I'm going to go down here and say React DOM.render. What do you want to render? That's the question. Well, I want to render this app component, comma, where do you want to render it? Documents dot query selector and container. Okay? And because we copied and pasted this HTML content, there was a class of container, so that remains consistent as to the things that we're kind of building today all have just a container. I go in here and I refresh. Oh, you know what? I spelled products wrong. I immediately just see, you know, my eye catches that products is misspelled. I'm going to go up here, hard refresh it, and I see this, item dot name. So I'm going to take a look at the lecture and see like, what happened here? Because I don't really see, I just see item dot name. I'm not seeing the actual name rendered here. Now, I know what happened, and I know the lecture notes don't contain it. Does anyone have an idea of what's missing? Just curious. If all we're seeing is the exact text of item.name, what could be the problem?
Maybe the curly braces.
Curly braces, right? Because in JSX, curly braces are meant to enumerate variable names, right? So I save that. Let me do it again. And there we see the name. So there is, you know, in the lecture, that one little flaw where there's no curly braces here. And so it is, in essence, you know, a good lesson, because what you did see was item.name, and that should indicate that it is outputting string text, the literal text that you told it to, not the enumeration. And that's because we're inside of JSX. Okay? On a side note, with adding comments to JSX, like inside render, I could add a normal comment. Any sort of JavaScript comment, like render must return HTML, right? We know that. But inside of this return is JSX, must return HTML, and I'm going to say HTML, I'm going to say JSX because that's really what it is. I mean, it is HTML and JavaScript. Sometimes it's just HTML that it's returning, but it returns JSX, right? In here, if you wanted to add a comment, it would have to be two curly braces, / star, / and now this is a comment inside of JSX. Okay, that's how you add a comment inside of JSX. Just going to make sure that everything is here, everything is good, no errors. Cool. I'm just going to put here, this is what we did. Okay, what we got so far. Got a message, sweet, pretty much. Yeah, I'll put that here. Okay, just let me know when you're all set up with that and you output the content, okay? Looks pretty good. Looks like everyone's kind of like banging it out. So I'm just gonna, while everyone's still just pumping it out, I'm just gonna put here another comment inside of JSX just to indicate that all variables must use curly braces to be enumerated. Okay? Without those curly braces, those variables will not be enumerated. Okay? So we want them to be enumerated here. And the same thing with this. If we didn't put the curly braces around the products.map, that would have caused errors. Like if I were to get rid of this, let's just see what would happen. Don't do it. I'm just doing it to see what would happen. And look, woo, we get errors. We don't see anything on the screen. And it's like, hey, item is not defined because it can't render this as JavaScript anymore. And so it's like, I don't really know what you're talking about. This thing doesn't exist, this item. So curly braces allow us to enumerate all variables must use curly braces. To be enumerated in all JavaScript must be in curly braces. Okay, now if I do this, everything looks pretty good. Okay? So now our app right now, our app doesn't have any state. Okay, it has things and it is rendering things on the screen, but it doesn't have any idea of state. Those things are just rendered and like, how do I control them? How do I know that a new thing was added or something was removed, right? Just think of the shopping cart. We'd have to keep track of that. And in this instance, we're going to be adding something later on to our products list, and that's going to change state. So our app has no state. No view is, it's just based on the data that you gave it. So not all components have state. So this is important to make a note of. Components like class-based components can be leveraged for kind of two reasons. One, because you want to include methods and you want to use methods, or two, because you want to be aware of state. So don't think because I have a component, I gotta have state there. You do not. State should be used sparingly and meticulously throughout the app. Only the components that need to be aware of state should pretty much have it. Okay? It's just overhead for this thing. So, it gives you an example. A simple nav bar is just hard-coded, can be a React component, but it shouldn't really have state. But in our line store, we're going to add state. So state itself is a special keyword in React. Okay, in order to use it, we have to set up our constructor function. So this may kind of ring a bell when we were creating classes in Unit 1, I believe. And so here's our class component, right? Well, in order for us to make use of state, and I want to preface this, there are multiple ways of including state, constructor being the most prevalent way of doing it. But there are other ways. You're going to see it written. I don't want you to think like if you ever saw state and it wasn't inside the constructor, you'd be like, oh my God, that's crazy. Where'd that come from? I told you that there's several ways to do things in React. But in our React component, I'm going to put the constructor. Okay, here I'm passing in props. Okay, props. This constructor is a method. This method takes in this super method, so it's calling something. And once again, I will go into what this is doing. Then we have this dot state is an object, and this object will have a key and a value. Okay. And in our render function here, we're going to change a little bit. We're not going to have this looping construct here, right? Says that we're going to get rid of that. Let me just see. We should just have one thing in here. So I'm going to go here and change this. I'm going to get rid of this. And our message here, our H1 isn't going to be message anymore. It's just going to be, hey, big time shopping. Okay. And let's see. Let's just make sure we get this, because there was a lot here. We'll go into like outputting the thing in just a section. I want to make sure that this gets added and it gets added correctly. Okay. I'll explain what's happening in here. That's really like relatively new stuff. So as everyone's, just catching up, I'll explain what's happening with the constructor. A constructor is how we accept parameters, right? When we instantiate a new instance of a class, there are times that we want to pass data to the class, right? We want to pass some arguments to the class, and our constructor is a way of accepting those arguments, okay? So if we ever wanted our class to contain properties and not methods, right? Because render is a method, and not the methods, but just properties, information about it, you use the constructor. And then, so what's with super? Super allows us to instantiate or pull some of this React component stuff down, the context of it, some additional stuff, as well as allows us to reference this keyword of this within the constructor. So without super, we wouldn't have access to this inside of the constructor, okay? You saw that we had access to this previously when we did this dot props, okay? And we're able to access this dot props anywhere here, but the minute we have the constructor, super allows us to have a context of this within the constructor, okay? So let me just put here, super allows us to reference this keyword, okay? It also, super in the world of classes, ES6 classes, inherits everything from the React component, more things. So it kind of instantiates it and it gets all the properties and methods that it did have from React. So inherits, super also inherits all the parent functionality. Okay, let me just put it as functionality. That functionality could be represented as properties or methods, okay? And so we have here super, and we're passing in props now because we got to get props into this context here. Okay, so the constructor is this really, special thing that in an app, in a class-based component, allows us to do things, okay? I just want to make sure we're all good. Our constructor going, okay? Awesome. We actually do have, I'm not going to give it out now, but once again, just as it pertains to the constructor, I did say there's more ways to write this. There are instances where the constructor is not used. There's a really cool article here. The constructor is dead, long live the constructor. And they talk about different use cases for the constructor. And they go in more depth of, what the constructor is doing. Just kind of wanted to show it to you. Not going to hand it out now, but if you want it, Slack it, or I'll Slack it later today. So what we want to do is still see something, right? I still want to see one of those things inside of the products table. So inside of our div, I'm not going to output anything into the UL just yet, but inside of this div, I'm going to say this dot state dot products 0, the first thing, and just grab its name. That's really all I want. I just want to make sure that my state's all set up, everything's working, and then I can grab something from state. Okay, and if I do this, hard refresh, I see only one thing. Okay, so this is really okay. That's what we should have inside of our render, along with the parent div, right? So you need this parent. This will allow us to render as many child elements as we want, okay? JSX allows one parent element and as many nested elements as you want, but they have to be wrapped up and surrounded by a single parent. And so we should just see Allen wrench. It's the first thing in there. If you change this to be, I don't know, the 5th thing, which is really the 6th thing, right? We'll see something different. Doggy treats box. Doesn't matter what you change this to, as long as the number doesn't exceed how many things are inside of the products array, okay? So when we initiate state, right, we're given the options now to, let me just put here that state is in object, right? And we also know that, I'll just put a note up here, that props is in object. Okay, so both state and props are objects. Okay, props is what gets passed in. We don't create it as an object, it's created for us. Okay, and is passed in as an object. Okay, state is an object that we create as an object. That's the big difference. Props we don't have control over. I mean, we have control over the keys and the values that get converted into the object, but we don't create it. And state is an object that we create as an object, okay? And so we'll give it whatever key we want, and then we'll store whatever thing we want to store inside of it, okay? And once again, this products here is kind of global because products was up there, right? I mean, we imported it and we had access to it earlier. And when we were doing this looping here, just go back here to our loop, right? I was calling products, that variable, as it was loaded into the global memory space in the file before app.js got loaded, or our app.js file, right? Now I'm storing products inside of state, which means we need to reference it differently. Okay? I don't want to reference that global thing. I want to reference the thing that my app has a handle on. And it has a handle on products as it is stored within the state. Okay, so my application, its state right now is everything that was in products. That's what it knows about. Okay, so its current state of products is everything that's stored in products. Okay, and we're going to kind of go back or previous and add those things. So we were able to output one. I'm going to, get rid of that one. We don't need that one anymore. We want to kind of go back into our UL and start looping over this dot state dot products dot map. There's a product, right? Fat arrow, fat arrow, fat arrow. And we want to output an LI. And that LI is going to have the product name. And we are going to end the LI. Okay. And if we do this, and I save it, and I go back here and I hard refresh it, I should see all of those things. Okay? So here you go. With that, actually, you know what? I'm just going to give you the whole UL. You know, the context of where it goes. Okay. Just make sure you can output all those things. Now I'm just, you know, while you're catching up, I'm just gonna run something once again. This one isn't in the lecture notes, but I'd like you to see what React is doing to the elements that are returned from the map. Okay, so if I said, hey, let products map is equal to the return of this. Okay, once again, I just want you to see it. And if we were to console log, hey, this is products map, okay? Just to see how React is really like changing these things. These aren't like normal LI elements. They're a little different. And what you're going to see here is, what do you do? This is products. Oh, this is products map. So here, I have two things. This is products, and this is products map. Look at the difference between these. You see what React is doing with this? React is converting this thing. Does anyone know what React is actually converting it into? Do you know what the data type of this thing truly is, the object? Can anyone just, from looking at it, make that distinction? I'll give you a hint. It's in red. I'll give you another hint. It's not the red that says type LI.
Symbol.
Symbol, all right. And we didn't really cover symbols, but I know that you covered symbols in Ruby. And that I think Matt even mentioned that symbols have been introduced in JavaScript and that this is a symbol. And a symbol represents that an element that can only have like unique things to it. That's the difference. Like a symbol is like everything is unique in a symbol. That's the best way that I can really explain it. I don't really work with symbols. It's not something that I work with, but React is cutting edge. So they work with symbols, okay? So when you see it done like this, you get an idea of what React is doing. It is changing the thing and giving it additional properties so that it can manage it, okay? So again, I'm just gonna comment this out. I'm not gonna leave it there because I don't want it to like confuse anyone, okay? Good, we got 16. I'm gonna make sure, I don't wanna go too far and leave too many people behind if I'm pushing the pace fast. You just reach out to me, let me know. And a lot of the times, the way this is done right here, instead of doing this here, you'll run it here, and then you'll just enumerate that thing down here, okay? So there's a couple of ways to do it. We'll leave it like this, once again. That's what the lecture has. We're gonna stick with that. I just wanted to show you what it was and what doing a map inside of this React class actually does to the thing. It changes the thing quite a bit, okay? So we want to render a few different properties of the actual elements, right? So we know that the elements here, right? Oh, I don't think I did it anymore. I think I commented out, right? So, you know, these are our elements and they have a name, a price, and a description. Cool. I want to see two of those properties. So what we can do is inside of here, inside of our map, right, we can return those. Now, here's the thing, though, that we see here. When you go to multiple lines, you need the curly braces. So, I mean, this is pushing it on multiple lines right here because I'm squeezing it in, but it's not kind of the multiple line we're talking about. So if I expand this out just a little bit, here it is. If I want to do multiple lines, I have to use curly braces. So I'm going to do, there's an open curly brace, right? This is going to be another curly brace, right? So two curly braces. But I also need to have the return keyword in here because we have the code block. There's an implicit return. In here, in this instance here, there was an implicit return. We didn't have the state return keyword. We didn't need curly braces for our code block. This is part of the fat arrow construct. If it's just one small thing that you're outputting on one line, then you don't need the return keyword or the curly braces. But the minute you go to another line and you're doing multiple things, in this instance, we're still kind of producing one thing. This still could have been done on one line, but a lot of the times it's not going to be the case. We now need to reference the return keyword, right? And the return keyword is going to have an open and a closing. Now I have to remove that closing parens, and I need to put that closing parens there. So I'm going to break this down so we can kind of see how it is. So it's that, move this over, move that over, and then do this, okay? So this closes the code block. Yeah, move this over still, just a little bit. This closes the return, and then closes the JSX code block. How about that? That's really what it's doing, right? This is code that's running inside of JSX. I'm also just going to expand the product name to include products.price, right? Just a space, product.price. Still need the curly braces because these are variables. I made a note here, all variables must use curly braces to be enumerated, okay? I'm just gonna run it. I'll slack out the code. I just wanna make sure I didn't break anything, and here I have the prices too, okay? Let's do this. And here is the whole LI. Hit that and make sure that that's outputted. It's a perfect area for like syntax errors and issues, no doubt. So having those closing or those comments that indicate what ends what is a pretty good, solid thing to do at the beginning while you're doing this. Once again, I would have probably just put all the closing code block and parens, the curly braces and parens on one line. Probably how I would have done it. But for the sake of this, just so that you can see where all of them begin and end, just may make it clearer. You kind of resolve a few typos that may pop up just from doing that. And I think, right, that's going to take us to the very first portion. Okay, and so we have it. And so really what we were able to do up to this point was, I mean, this particular lesson allowed us to include state. So if we just do a quick review here, adding state requires for us at this point in time the constructor. Okay, constructor allows us to take things in, but the constructor is also used to execute the parent context. So if we are extending ourselves to inherit from a parent, super executes those parent constructs so that we can use that functionality. And so that's what super is doing here. Both of them always contain props. Just put props in both of them for this and for this, and we'll get into that later. Creating state. State is an object. We just created using this dot state. Okay, now that state is available everywhere. So this is a context, right, that we're extending to include something called state. State is a object, contains the key of your choice, whatever you want to call it, and then the value, whatever it is that you're importing. Okay. The other key thing that we did here is looping over or mapping over an array. This is how you do it in React. You don't do for loops. You use map. That's the construct that we use when we're looping over arrays in React. Okay, that's how you see it. This is how it's done. Okay. Awesome, that was good. Got through state. Sweet. Okay. So let's do this. It's 3:30. Why don't we take a break till 3:40? Then we'll jump into the next section. I'll stay online. I'm just going to get some water. Slack me if you had any issues, and I'll help you out. So let's take a break. Come back at 3:40. Boom. Okay, let's take a look. Now that we know about state, we need a reason to change state. One of those reasons would be to take in user input. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing here. So objectives are to learn about state and forms and see how the two are related. Learn how to update state. Learn how to make one source of truth, and that's really kind of state being the one source of truth. And learn about events and use the on change and submits methods. Okay, or I'm sorry, on change and submit events. Okay, what you're going to see is the events in React have an on before it. On change. This one should be updated to say on submit. On mouse over, on mouse leave, on key press. What you'll see is there's a bunch of those types of events. So HTML elements like inputs, right, and putting in an input, maintain their own state. You're typing stuff into an input and a natural normal input, and we never did anything to like tell it to keep track of what you're typing in. It just kind of does it as part of its default behavior. You know, and as you kind of enter characters or delete characters, it keeps track of that. It knows what you're doing. So what we're going to need to do is give React control over those inputs. It needs to know what you're typing. It needs to grab it. Okay, so React is going to maintain that state of our user inputs so that there's this one source of truth. Okay, so all we're going to do here is, well, we're going to do a lot more, but right now all we're going to do is add an input. Okay, and the input will be type text. That's all we're adding. Self closing element, right? These are the elements we know about, like self-closing things. That's the context I was talking about earlier. Okay, now that we've done this, we can type into this field. So if I refresh this page, I see this, and I can type in anything that I want. I can say, you know, hammer. That's what I want to type in. Nothing's going to happen, but it is keeping track of what I type in. But it's not keeping track of it here. Like, our app doesn't know what you just typed in. So we need a way to have our app, our React app, keep track of it. Okay, and we're going to use this concept called controlled components. Okay, and so we are going to control that input. If a value is typed into that input, it gets put into state immediately, and we keep track of that. Okay, so what we're going to do is kind of set that up. I'm going to go into state. Now, since state is an object and it takes in multiple key value pairs, every key value pair must be separated by a comma. So I'm clearly putting the comma here. Whoop, whoop. So we can add another thing. I'm going to put value, and right now value is an empty string because no one's typed in anything. So of course it's going to be an empty string. Okay. Now that we have state, we know that here, when we did our mapping, we were able to grab the value that was in products, which kind of insinuates that we would be able to grab the value that's in state now for the value. What we're going to do is, we had the input. I'm going to surround the input here first in the form, okay? Because forms are what we submit, right? I'm just going to tab that over, okay? I'm going to have a form. I'm going to submit it, and I'm going to set its value equal to this dot state dot value, and let's see what that gives us. I'm going to set that to be state. I'm going to go up here. I'm just going to refresh. Well, that's just giving us this dot state dot value, right? That's not what we want, right? So if this is what we've tied into it, right, we can't really do that. So what we'd want to do, since this is JSX, is do curly braces here because it's JSX, right? JSX means variables need to be enumerated. Whatever stored in state and value needs to be enumerated. So this is incorrect. So I'm going to go back here and just do this. And there's nothing there, once again, because the value in state is empty right here. Okay? So let me grab this form. I want you to add it like that. Okay? Add that form. Make sure it comes in blank. I mean, we could always test this out too. So if I was to like, hey, if I was to put name there, I wonder if now it would, you know, if I refreshed it, look, name. Okay, cool. So I know it works. Once again, I'm not jumping to assumptions here. I'm like, hey, if I put something in there, then it should be enumerated. So whatever I'm going to get rid of name. That's not what I want there. I'm just showing you that having a value in state will be seen if the value here is shown. And that's key to what we're trying to achieve. Because as the user types in things here, we are going to be constantly updating this value in state. And every time that that value in state is updated, well, what we see in the input is then evaluated and redrawn. Okay, seems like a lot of work, to be honest. If I type in one letter, boop, it'll go to value and like add that value there and add that value. There's different ways to approach this. Okay. So let's see what we got. 14, right? So it's pretty solid so far. Now, also, if we did it the right way here, I'm just gonna do this. You can't type into the form anymore. If I try to type into the form, nothing happens. And that's because the form now, the input, isn't in control of itself. It's given its control over to React. React controls that form, okay? And so React is optimized to only re-render elements that have changed or updated. And that's kind of one of its key functionalities. Like the key benefits to React is that it only updates or changes the things that need to be changed. In other, like in JavaScript and jQuery, a lot of the times you have to grab a whole element, change something, and then write the whole thing back. And it doesn't do that, okay? So even that looping construct of mapping over an array of things, if we updated one of those things, React isn't going to re-render all of those list items. It's going to look for the thing that's changed and just update the one thing. That's what makes it performant, okay? So in order for us to update states, we're going to have to leverage this method called setState, okay? So it's a function, it's a method, right? Once again, anything that's attached to a class is a method. This is, yeah, I would say maybe it's a function instead. It's called setState. So what we're gonna do is inside here, inside of our function, I'm just gonna kind of collapse render so we don't see all of that context there, okay? I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna create a new method, to handle changes to input, okay? And by changes, I mean when the user types in. So I'm gonna say handle change. I'm gonna give it the event that happens, and then I'm gonna console log event.target.value. So event.target shouldn't look really strange. I believe we did it in unit 1, and when we're doing it with jQuery, you would grab it as $, grab the input.val. The value is stored in there, so that shouldn't look too strange, okay? Now, what we are gonna do here is add, let's move this over a little bit. We are going to add the method, this onChange method, okay, to the input. So I'm going to expand my render again, and on this input, we are just going to extend this. Now, I'm going to kind of clean this this up a little bit. As you have multiple kind of attributes, right? I did mention that, you know, type and value, or before when we were talking which player, I kind of referenced it as possible an attribute. I mean, they are props. You put them on separate lines just because it makes it easier to read them after a while. When there's too many on one single line, you have to scroll back and forth. It makes it hard to determine where one begins and where one ends. So here I'm just putting them on different lines. And I'm going to leverage the method on change. That's the event, right? So on change is the event. When something changes, I want to execute the this dot handle change, right? That's what it is. We are going to call the method handle change anytime you type in to the form, okay? We're not doing a submit yet. The input itself can have a event listener listen directly to it on change, and the form can have an event listening to it on submit, okay? So now that we have this, right, let's just take a look and see. I want to see that it's actually working. And if I go here and I refresh, I go to the console and I start typing in, you see how the letters now are being output as I type them? You won't see them here because once again, state, the value that's passed, the value that's in state here is empty. We're not updating that yet. So although we are capturing the change that is happening to input, and we are passing that event to the handle change method, and console logging the value that's typed in, we're not updating state as of yet. So you don't see anything here, and you won't see it until this value has been updated, okay? So we have this. So this is what our input should look like, right? A little snapshot. There's our whole form. Make sure everything looks like that. Okay, so let me know when you got that. You console log, and you should see some text, right? Everything that you console log, everything that you type into input, you should see in the console log. Cool. Pretty easy so far. Once again, one small typo could send you back. Because the idea now is, hey, now that we're grabbing the letter, right, that's pretty cool. Why don't we store those letters inside of state, right? That's kind of where we're going. Now, you might think that you can do that by directly touching state. So that is just really, really bad practice. We can't do that. So in our handle change method, which I have over here, you know, anyone who's new to React might be like, oh, why don't, since I can grab the value for state, why don't I just set it manually, right? This is really bad. We shouldn't be doing this. And that's because things that are in state are done in a kind of a queue-based system, okay? Our app is going to be used by hundreds, millions of people, each one of them trying to update state at some point in time for this application that maybe they all have access to. And because of that, we want to queue things. I don't want me making a change to precede you making a change to something, okay? If you made the change first, then your change should happen and then mine should happen. This just kind of, whoever does this last, right, will just kind of jump in and do it. So it's not a good system to use. We wanted to use queuing to wait for that to happen, okay? And so for that to happen, we have to use this new function here called setState. So we console logged the value here, and we can leave the console log in. There's no reason for us to remove it. I'm going to say this dot set state, right? It's a function here. It's a function that takes in an object, and it knows that you're updating state. And the question is going to be, what key and state do you want to update? The key here is value. What is the new value that you want to assign to this key? Well, event.target.value. That is the new value. Okay? If there were multiple key value pairs here, right, that we wanted to update, we could just take it to another line and then add multiple and separate them by commas. And there'll be times when there's going to be multiple things in state that we are going to be changing. Okay? So now that I have state right here, if we go back and I update and I type in, oh, what happened? Memory property, this, that, set state. Ah, that's why. Yes. So we have an issue right now. Okay. There's this context here of this. We're having an issue with this. So if it runs, and you tried, right? I'm gonna just clear out the errors. I'm gonna run this. Let's see, no, there's no errors right now, but if I go up here and I'm like, hammer, oh, the minute this thing is executed inside of handle change, we run into an issue, okay? And so the issue is that the context of this is dependent on where it's executed, okay? And for the most part, when we executed this down here, it knew where this method was. When we said this dot state, it knew where state was, and that was fine. In the render method, we can access these things, and that's perfectly fine, considering that every component needs a render method, right? So under the hood, there's certain things that are happening with render that we didn't do, but facilitate us accessing this here, okay? What we need to do here is to do something called binding, okay? And what we need to do is take this method and kind of rebind it to the class's instance of state. And it's a really hard concept to kind of like explain, okay? I'm going to type it out. Just kind of take my word for what it's going to look like. In just 1 second, let me see. They do the binding and give us an instance of it here. Mutate state. Okay. So we have to do the binding. Then they give us an instance here. So I'm going to do this. This dot handle change is equal to this dot handle change dot bind this. And now you're like, what the hell is that? Okay, I'm gonna make sure it works first. Now let's just make sure that if I type in hammer, it works now. Okay. So we never went into, once again, this is kind of more the advanced JavaScript. There's a few concepts. One of them is bind. And so what bind does, what we're doing now really with bind is we're creating a new function. This is a new function that is equal to the old function where we're binding or taking in to our function the context of this. We're passing in. So this thing has a new context of this. And now that we know that this works, right, let me just slack that out here. Let me do this, get this out so you start working with it. Make sure it works. And then I'm going to do just a couple of console logs just to kind of show you how the context is changing. Okay? I'm going to comment that out. I'm just going to comment state out here because I want you to see that console.log, this This is this inside of handle change, okay? So I want to just console log whatever the context of this is here, okay? Let's see if this has some sort of context or it doesn't have any context. Okay, so if I type in H and I say this is inside of handle change and it comes back as undefined, which is telling me that inside this method there is no context of this. It does not know what it is. That's really what this is telling me. It does not know what it is. Now, if I was to console log the same thing inside of render, so I'm going to change the console log to say that this is inside of render. I just want to see, I'm going to do a hard refresh, and this is inside of render, and look, it knows what this represents. This represents the app class, and it knows that. But the minute I try to type in anything in here, well, handle change is like, I don't have a context of this anymore. I don't have a method called setState. I don't have anything. I don't know what this really is. I wouldn't even know what this dot props is if you passed it in, because I don't have a handle on this. And so what we're trying to do here is give it a handle. Take the value, and that's what this binding does, take the value of this that is applied to the app and give it, hand it over to handle change. And so this now will be passed into handle change, and handle change will like have this awakening where, oh man, I know what this is now. This is the app. Like, I've been given a new context, and that context is the app itself. Okay? It still is. I get it. It's a hard concept to kind of like wrap your head around. But binding is a way, in this instance, to give handle change a new context. Okay? So this gives handle change a new context of this, right? Because it didn't have one before. Before it was undefined. Context of this being the app. Okay? And I mean, being is, you know, the context that it's passing is the context of this from the app. Okay? So the fact that we saw in render, we didn't have to do anything to get render working because render is a required method, right? So if I was to just put here and say, render is a required method for a React class component. And because it's required, under the hood, they're binding that from the very beginning. It's bound somewhere under the hood. We didn't see it. But this thing we created on the fly. And so we need to say, I got to pass the context of this to you because you have a context. Otherwise, you're not going to know what's going on. Okay? Now, if we allow state, this dot set state, everything works, right? Once again, if I do hammer, boop, everything seems to be working. Okay? So it's working for everyone, it looks like, right? I'm gonna guess. I just added a few console logs if you wanted to kind of console log along the way. Well, our form is going to take multiple inputs, right? Just think, a normal form isn't just have one thing. It's like, hey, type your first, type your last name, type your email address. Give me a description of what you're writing to us about. What's the best number to contact you? All of these fields, right? And so we want to be able to capture more information than just the name of something, right? And we're basing this off, I stop console logging. I thought I stopped console logging the products here, right? We want you to be able to add something. So if I want you to add a new product, I would suggest, you know, we're probably already capturing name, but we would need a price and we would need a description in order to capture all of the things needed to add something here, right? We don't want you to leave out anything. We want all of this information, okay? So in order to get that started, in state, right? Here we have products and we have the value that we wanted to capture, but we're going to be a little bit more specific about the naming conventions for our thing, okay? So right now, let's take a look here. State. Yeah, okay. We're not going to be really using value at this point in time because we're going to have three things that we want to capture. And value was indicative of this input, and this is saying, hey, we want to put the value in there, and that's what we want to put in this value. But we're going to have a few different fields with different names that we're going to be adding. So I want to just prep us to do that. So in our state, on my line 13, I'm going to say name. We haven't captured anything from the user versus about the name. Price, we haven't captured what the price is. And description, you know, describe the item. Okay. So we have that. Just adding a few. So your state should look like this, okay? That's all we did to update state, add a few things. We're prefacing when we add in the additional form elements, okay? So just update state with that. And we're going to be using a different way. We still need the value here. This wasn't what I meant to reference earlier when I was like, hey, that's going to change. That's not what we're going to change. Okay? Or that's not what those values in state are going to reference at this point in time. Value is still something we want. Value is now going to be name instead of value. So I'm going to make one small change here, and that change is going to be state.name, because name is what we want to pull from state, right? Whatever in state here in name will show up here, okay? The last thing that I want to add here for this input is an ID. And the ID is going to be equal to name at this point in time. And this will make sense in just a minute. Because I'm going to have multiple inputs, I need a way to distinguish each input and grab its appropriate values, okay? And then updates the state's corresponding key value pair, okay? So the way to do that is inside of state here, when we update state, instead of doing value, hard coding this as saying this was value, but it's no longer value. There's three things in here, and once we have the rest of our form inputs, it could literally be any one of those things. It could be any one, okay? So we're going to use some sort of dynamic way of determining what is the key that we are targeting. Now, a dynamic way to do that is to use these brackets here, right? And instead of saying value, which is a hard-coded word, we are going to say event.target.id, okay? Now what it's going to do is it's going to go down here and know that whatever input was changed, it's going to grab the ID of the elements. The ID of the element here would be, this would be converted into name. Ultimately, that's what it's going to be. And it would be the same thing as saying this. This will ultimately transmit into this. Don't type this. I'm just giving you what it's going to look like. Name. And then events.target. Okay? .value. This ultimately will be converted into this, and then this will be whatever the value is, you know, hammer, if that was the value. I'm going to get rid of this. I just wanted to show you that this is going to be dynamic. One change event for multiple events where it's able to dynamically grab the value for that input. And that's important because now instead of capturing one input, we're capturing multiple inputs, okay? The only thing I did not add in the form was this label. You got to add the label, and the label is just, you know, the name of the input, right? So if I say, hey, label, HTML4, this is for accessibility, the HTML4 name, right? Label. We do that, and I refresh. Okay, I'm just going to type in, you know, hammer, right? Nothing's errored. Okay, and we're capturing it, and it's outputting it because we're capturing it, and we're storing it in state. Okay? Every time I type a letter, you can see here HAM, HAMM, HAMME. It's being stored in state. It's being output back here. Okay? So we need more fields. We don't have enough fields there. So what we're going to do here, oh, that's the one thing I didn't put name in here, is this. I'm going to copy these form elements. We don't really want to type all these out. I'm going to replace the inputs and the label that I have and just paste all of them in there. Let me select this out so we do the same thing. All I did was highlight the label and the inputs. I'm just going to tab these over. Boom, 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 boom. So they're in there. And each one of these, each one of them has, again, if I was to kind of organize these just a little bit more so they kind of make more sense, I would do something like this. If I was creating this, I would put them on separate lines so I could see everything just a little bit better, okay? Again, you don't have to. I'm just putting them on different lines because if I was truly writing this, this is how I would have put it on separate lines. Just makes it easier to see the different values, okay? And each one of them has an ID, right? So this ID is what's going to be used to target it. I'm going to put a little comment here, add like a JSX comment. Okay. Okay. ID is being used here to reference the element targeted, right? The element's value in, or the element's key in state, okay? And it's doing that using this context here. So this is our new state. Select this out too. So that ID is being used in multiple places. Price and description. The same thing. The ID is being used there to make it dynamic. One method that handles all of the on-change events. It knows what event you clicked on. If it knows what event you clicked on, then it's easy to say, hey, grab the event and just grab its ID. That becomes the key. I just target it there. This is a standard process that everyone uses with React when doing it this way. Okay? Is everyone good with the inputs? Everyone is so not clicking on anything, so I don't know if I'm losing people. There we go. Just give me like.
Just kind of copy it.
What's that?
But I'm still just copying and pasting stuff. So
Okay. All right. Sweet. Looks like 19. Awesome. Okay. So we need to have a form, or, well, we do have our form. So if I go back up here now and I refresh, oh, what did I see here? Unexpected token, this.state.name. Oh, so it's saying that this, I wonder if it's saying that this is an error. Let me just see. Nope. Unexpected token.
Save it real quick.
What's that?
You just have to save app.js real quick.
Oh, I had the save tool on, so I'm surprised that it wasn't saving it. I haven't had to save like once so far, Jeremy. It's always been saving it. I think maybe because I pasted it didn't see it. All right. So I'm going to go back here and just add that comment.
Joe, I took the curly brackets off and it worked.
Yeah, it's not allowing us do that here. You know why I think so? Also because it's inside of the input element. It's not working, so we'll just take it out.
I know. If you just take the curly braces off of the comment.
Oh, you're saying if I just remove that and leave it like this?
Yeah, that worked for me.
Oh, okay. Oh, sweet. Okay. Because we are in JSX. All right. Close to the end of this particular lecture, too. Getting good. So what we need to do is show our thing, right? If you added it, we'd like to kind of maybe have a preview of it. So we're going to make a little preview box so we can see as we type in the things, and then we'll put it after our last element. So we're going to put it after our last element, but before the start of the UL. So I'm going to take this. I'm just going to put it where it needs to be, right? So it says before the UL, right? But before the UL, after the last element, but before the UL. So I'm going to do this after the form. I'm going to tab this over. It looks good. All right. Just going to start this up and let's see. All right. So I have these things. Now here's a preview of our new item. So if I type in hammer, and a hammer maybe cost $20, and describe the item, best hammer ever. So we can see that we're getting dynamic results here, right? So this is going to represent whatever you type in here. We're just doing it to simulate that when something changes here, we can grab it and then add those changes someplace else. And you can see the immediate result of you making these updates. Okay? So this was really all we added. I'll select that out so that you don't have to type that all out. This is just temporary. Like you'll type it out. In the end, we really just want to capture it and add it in here and see it this way versus seeing it this way. That's not the ultimate goal, how we want to see this at. Okay. Again there just a little bit longer, a little bit much. Might be able to get this done by 4:30, take a break. So our ultimate goal here is to allow the user to add something and then push the thing that they add, right? We're going to capture all this information. We are going to update and handle change. We'll update this. But at some point in time, when the user clicks on, submit, we want to capture that information that they put in and then do something with it, right? Push it into products. That's the ultimate goal that we're looking to do now. Push it into products. And so for us to do that, we're going to have to add a submit button so that we have something to click on. So at the end of the form here, just before the end of the form closes, I'm going to add an input with a type equal to submit. Okay? And really all that's going to do is produce a button that looks like a submit button. That's really it. Once we do it all and we submit, no real styling here, it looks pretty ugly, but still, once we submit it, boop, it'll do something. Okay? Once we add that tiny little submit button, okay, we need to attach an event to the form itself, right? Because it's the form that we submit. The button kind of is there to be clicked on, but the form itself is listening for a submit event. And a submit event is clicking on a submit button. Those two go hand in hand. If the form has a submit button, which is what it does, then when the handle submit function or the event listener is executed, it will do whatever it's supposed to do. So this becomes the trigger. When that happens, the form has an event listener. So we are going to add an on submit event listener, which is going to call this dot handle submit. Okay? What I also want to point out here is the naming conventions of our methods. Handle submits, handle change. So these methods handle events. We kind of reference them as like event handlers. These are the corresponding methods that are tied to events. So when you start looking through your code and I start seeing handle something, I know that those are methods that are directly tied to events, okay? So that's what we're gonna add to the form. Okay, so we added that to the form and I added this to the very ends, okay? So we have the button, just make sure that works. What we don't yet have is the actual handle submit method, okay? So we're gonna handle it, and then we're gonna do something, okay? Because right now, if I go here and I submit, look what happens to the screen. What's happening there? Can anyone explain what is happening? Nothing happens, when I type in something, page doesn't refresh. Give it a nice price, page doesn't refresh. Describe the item, hey, item, page doesn't refresh. But when I click on submit, the page refreshes. Why does the page refresh?
That's like a default behavior for a submit button.
Yeah, it's the default behavior. And we stop that default behavior by calling the event.prevent default method. Okay? This method is directly related to stopping the default behavior. So now if I hard and I do it, nothing happens. The form does not update at all. So this prevent default prevents the page from loading. Once again, this is a throwback to the Wayback Machine when somebody submitted a form. You wanted to clear out the fields, and that's how you cleared out the fields. You captured the data and cleared out the fields. Okay? So we're able to tie this submit event, connect it to handle submit, and we need to now update state, okay? Before we include any reference to this, so I'm just gonna say here, making any reference to the keyword this requires that this method be bound in the constructor, because that's what we're doing, right? Here's our constructor, and it's really the constructor. By collapsing the constructor, the super state all disappear. If I expand it, these bindings come back. So we need to rebind because we are going to be using state there. So let's just, you know, be proactive and say handle submit is equal to this dot handle submit dot bind this. Okay. Once again, that binding is outside of like what's happening with binding. The context is pretty easy to kind of write out. It's this dot the name of the thing is equal to this dot the name of the thing. Those two are identical. Dot bind this. As long as you can kind of like swallow the Kool-Aid on that one and just be like, all right, that's what we need to do. And with the console logs, I try to give you context as to what was happening under the hood. Okay. So we're going to bind here. So we should have these two bindings. All right, and they should have already existed. One should have existed before because we did use it before. And now we have the second one, which means now we can leverage the keyword of this within handle submit. Okay, we did the binding. Everything is good. Now we have access to this. So our goal is to grab the values that are in state, because once the person clicked on submit, everything that we were capturing was put inside of here, right? So everything was in there. If everything that we captured was in there, the minute they click on submit, we're going to capture that information, put it into a new object, and then push that object or unshift that object into the products array, and then reset all the default values. Okay, so the steps that we need to do here is create a new object with the key value pairs, right? Key values stored in state. Okay. Call this dot set state to, here we're going to unshift the item, push, unshift. We're going to put it to the very beginning of the array so we can actually see it at the very top instead of having to scroll down. Call this dot state to unshift the new object into the first place in the array, and then reset the values in state so that they clear the input fields. Okay, that's what we need to do. I'm going to do it. I'm going to say const new item is equal to, all right, the name of the thing. Well, this dot state dot name, comma, the price that they put in, this dot state dot price, the description, this dot state dot description, check. We just created our new object. Awesome. The next thing is to call this dot set state to unshift the new object into the first place in the array. Awesome. So let's do this dot set state. Okay, state is a function that takes in an object. And the object are going to be the key value pairs in state that you want to update. You can update one key value pair, you can update all the key value pairs in state. Doesn't matter. What we want to do is tell it that products is going to be taking in the new item as the first place, and then we're doing this thing called the spread operator, and this is new. Let's go through this and just get it working, and then I'll go back and I'll explain what's happening with that. That's a new ES6 thing. If you haven't seen it before, then this is the first time you're seeing it. Description, and we can say describe the item. Okay, I'm just going to make sure it works. If it works, we'll come back. I don't want to produce any errors. Hammer, $6 hammer, best hammer ever, submit, blink. Look, hammer got pushed in. Our previews got emptied out, and our state was changed. I mean, our state's been changing every time we typed in something here. Okay, so here we go. This is what we did. Once again, this is going to put a note here that ... products is the spread operator. I'm going to put is the ES6 spread operator. And really what it does is it takes all of the existing elements in the array and just pulls them out one at a time and like puts them in there. I had showed that earlier with Babel. When we went to the Babel site, and I was like, oh, let's just take a look at babel.io. No, it's not .io. Babel.js, is it? No. Babel. You know what the site was again. Babel. Here we go. Babel the compiler. There we go. Babeljs.io. Okay, and when I said, hey, let's try it out, right? They gave us here was an example of it, the spread operator. It took this array and it opened it up, took out all the individual elements and put it into here, and then added the new elements. So the spread operator is a really nifty new tool to use. You haven't seen it before, you've seen it now. Okay? And that's what is happening here. Yeah, we are adding our new item, we're doing this, and we're mutating state. So now state is changing. Okay? And we reset the form, and the form now is all reset, ready to go. Okay? Sweet. Okay. It's pretty good. A lot of people have reached out about having any issues, so I'm assuming things are going fairly smoothly at this point in time. I'm just making that assumption. Why don't we take a break? It's 4:34, so why don't we take a break? Come back at 4:45. Take a break. Come back at 4:45. 4:40. Yeah, well, 4:45. Okay. If you have issues, I'll be here. Reach out. Okay, 4:45. We're back. Just put out the poll. Just give me a quick click. Let me know how you're feeling. Looks like we got about 11 people, 12, 13. All right, give me more. Perfect, hanging in there. Okay. Got a few hanging in there. I have a few questions. Cool. Once again, if you have questions, you can always, stop me. You can always try to answer those questions. I think it's important. Okay. Here's the last lecture for today is conditional rendering in React. Okay. So React allows you to do conditional rendering, just like anything else. I mean, it's just JavaScript. If the thing is this, do the other thing. Pretty self-explanatory. I mean, it's not too complicated. Conditional rendering is trying to achieve. What we're going to do is we're going to get our state set up so that we can leverage some sort of conditional rendering. And conditional rendering could be something like trues or falses, or it could be like the length of the array. The length of the array is 0, then there's nothing to show, so I don't render this. Maybe I render something else. Sorry, nothing to show, or I show the items. In our instance, we're going to use the true-false way of conditional rendering. And we're going to, our little store might be hiring. So we're just going to say, is hiring true? Okay. If something is true, we should display something on the page. That's the ultimate goal of what we're trying to do here. This shouldn't have affected anything. If I go back here and I refresh, nothing should break. There should be nothing that happens. Awesome. Okay, cool. I'm going to go back. Now, when we do conditional rendering, we're going to be doing it using a ternary operator. And this is a ternary operator. I know Matt has shown it to you before. We'll go ahead and we'll create it. I'm not going to walk through this small example here of the ternary operator. We'll just build one out and you'll see it in action. Okay? So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go down to, in our HTML, right? We had this H1. And so I'm going to put something below the H1 to indicate if we are hiring or not. Okay? So I'm going to add a ternary operator here. And I'm going to say, if not, this dot state dot is hiring, right? The question mark represents, this is our, oh, here we go. This has to be surrounded. We need the curly braces surrounding it. This is our if statement. Like, if that is true, then do this thing here. H2, yes. We are hiring. All right? Close the H2. And then colon, if it's not true. H2, nope. I'm just going to put nope. Okay, we know what it represents. So once again, this is our condition. If it's true, do this. If it's not true, do that. That's really what we're trying to state here. Okay, we can run this. I go back up here and I run this. Did I not save it? Should have returned that. Oh, here we go. Nope. Here we go. Nope. Because it is true, and we're saying here if it's not true, we are going to do this toggle. If I got rid of the exclamation, and we went here and we did this one more time, it'll say true. Yes, we are hiring. If I put that pound sign, the exclamation point back, I'll turn it into false. Okay, we're just toggling it. That's how it was in the lecture. That's how they thought it would be best appropriate. Once again, if you do have it, you don't have it. Not a big deal. It's just saying what we want the default to be. But once again, if we wanted the default to be false, we could have just went up here and said false. Is hiring is false. Okay? So we want to kind of toggle through things. We want to be able to click on something, toggle it. So this is another event that we are going to be doing. Okay? So in order to prepare ourselves for this event, right, I'm going to go down here and just above render, I'm going to create another event. This toggle hiring method, I'm sorry, we're going to create another method. And this method will update state. This dot set state is hiring. It's the opposite of what it was before, okay? Which is why they leveraged it down here, because they kind of wanted to re-emphasize. So we're just, this is a great way to toggle. Is hiring is going to be the opposite of what it was before. I don't have to know what it was before. I just set it to be the opposite of what, oh, so here I spell toggle with 2 L's. So now I'm going to fix that, toggling. Okay. What's the issue now? We're referencing this here. And what did I not do? I did not bind it here. Okay, without the binding, this dot toggle hiring is equal to this dot toggle hiring dot bind this. Okay, so 3 things we really did. We added something here. Actually 4 things, right? We added something in state to keep track of this toggling. We bound the method, which we originally first created, but let's just say if we were walking through this, oh, let's bind the method so that when we do create the method, we have access to this, okay? So once again, binding the method in constructor gives our method access to this, okay? Because it rebinds it to the construct. To this, I'm going to say to the context of this bound to the app. Okay? And then here we just added it where we did this. Now, we want a toggle thing, right? I mean, I'm putting a method here, this toggle thing here, which means we want to kind of toggle it. We want to do something with it. We're going to do it on the H1 here. So on the H1, we're actually going to say on click. So we're going to click the H1, that text, big time shopping. And every time we click on it, this dot toggle hiring, it should update what we see on the screen. This event triggers this method. This method sets state or changes our state. Whatever is hiring was before will be different, will be the opposite. Our component re-renders, and then this statement is then evaluated once again. It takes a look at state. Hey state, what are you? You're true or you're false? Oh, you're true, boom, we're hiring. Oh, you're false? Nope, we're not hiring. Okay? So I'm gonna take a look back here. I'm gonna refresh this. Here's big time shopping. If I click on it, boom, it changes. Okay? Boom, 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 boom. Okay? So really not too hard, especially after everything that we've done up to this point. That was just kind of, we're adding one small thing. Right? We bound methods. This will be our third binding. We bound those methods. I'm just going to kind of collapse these methods. We bound these methods so that we could have access to this in order to update state. That's really predominantly what we did this for. Right? And then in our HTML, we did whatever we needed here to make or facilitate either grabbing the values, like in our inputs, we grabbed the values there. When we did our form, we were able to submit the form and then grab what was in state, create an object, push it in. And then here was just one more small little thing that we could do this. So when you do that, when you do use the conditional rendering, you can do it to like make a decision on whole sections of HTML that you want to import. Right? I think maybe, Matthew, you had a question like, you know, they all have to be these separate components? No, they don't always have to be separate components. You can use conditional logic to output several sections of HTML, or conditional logic to output different components, really. In the end, all this HTML here, in here, what I see, I would, if I went back and refactored this, I would have created separate inputs, labels and inputs that are components that would have rendered those things. There's too much data here. It takes up too much space. And I'm already seeing the ability to turn this thing into its own component, right? I give it a name, I give it a method, and then if I gave it those two things, it would know what to do with those things, right? That's just another layer. We're not at that stage right now, but the fact that you see repetition here should be indicative of, hey, can't we turn those things into components? And the answer would be, yeah, you could turn those things into components. So that's really it. That's all we have for today. And this was just, you know, all the code. Everything that we've done is here. So if you did hit any errors, hit any issues, go through this. I'll push this up in a little bit. Sweet. So any questions on some of the stuff that we covered? Anything that you want to ask me before you jump into the lab? No, feel pretty good going into the lab? That's what I want to see. All right. Here's the afternoon lab. And I will breakout rooms, and then I'll assign labs. 2, 3, partners, make the breakout rooms. Okay, let me do this. All right. Slack out. Lab, and then I'll create the breakout. I'll shoot you the breakout. All right. There's the afternoon lab. I'm just going to full screen mode here. Okay. Korilla React receipts. So Korilla is a Korean barbecue tacos truck that makes thousands of hungry customers happy every year. CEO is thinking of updating their short order tracking system using React. So you're going to build out a prototype of this short order receipts tracker. Okay, so getting started. It's again index HTML, app.js, everything that we've done in H1 with some text inside it. Here is the content that you'll be rendering. Okay, we did it with data.js. It'll be receipt 1, receipt 2, receipt 3. 3 separate things, not stored in a single array, but 3 separate elements. Add the first receipt to state, right? So you could see it. Okay, make a receipt component that renders the first receipt. All the information in this receipt is going to need to be rendered. Okay, and in the end, there's Hungry for More, rendering the, oh, sorry. This. You're gonna render all 3 of them, right? Add the next 2 receipts to state to make 2 more receipt components so that you can give a view like that. And if you can add some CSS, that'd be great. Conditional rendering, part 3 is conditional rendering, the receipts, if they have been paid or not. So is there anything in here that says paid? No, but if we go to the actual receipt, you'll see paid is true, this one is false, and this one is false. So if it's true, then you'll render it, right? Right now, all the receipts are not paid false, okay? But some of them are true, right? One of them is true. Use a ternary operator to only show those, okay? Then go into the receipt data and change the value to true and check that the receipt will not display, okay? Maybe you can even add an event, a click, like, hey, paid, click, and it would make it change, right? Part 4, refactor for dynamic rendering. 3 receipts is pretty limiting. Let's put them in an array and then map over them for rendering. Right, up there your code so it renders the same. Same thing, this would be a looping construct, right? And then just Hungry for More. If you want more, add a click event to the receipts that changes the value from paid to true, right? I just mentioned that. Click on the receipt, immediately disappear from the browser. All right. So let me break everyone out into their groups and then we'll Go. Just make sure everyone's got somebody, everyone's here. Okay. Looks like we got 3 3s, just a couple of 2s. All right, here we go. I'm gonna open all the rooms. Oh, Jerica is 3 and 2 in your room, so I'm gonna add a room for Jerica. Get Jerica out of there. 2 10. All right, so 3 3 and 2. Sweet. All right, here we go. There you go. Guys, I didn't create a room, so I'm trying to create a room right now. Let's see. Jerica, you there? I don't want to do it here only because